So for the past 3 seasons of this deep dive, we've really, we've kind of asked you to look up.
We have, yeah.
If you were to, like, close your eyes right now and picture the world we've been exploring, you'd probably see these huge, sweeping cinematic images.
Very dramatic stuff.
Exactly. You'd look up at the terrifying silhouettes of those long ships cutting through the sea fog, or
Right.
you'd look up at the grand, smoke-filled halls of the kings, the imposing walls of besieged cities. You'd look up at the pantheon of gods ruling over this incredibly violent, dramatic age.
It's been a very top-heavy world, so to speak.
It really has. It's been all sweeping drama. But today, because we are opening season 4, I want you to completely wipe that image from your mind.
Yeah, we are deliberately changing the pace here. I mean, the grand drama of kings and gods, that's taking a backseat today.
Totally. We are leaving the battlefields behind. I don't want
Yeah.
you looking up the gods or the kings for this one. I want you looking down.
Down into the mud.
Yes. Literally into the mud. Because beneath the modern pavement of a totally normal English city lies a 1,000-year-old trash can that completely shatters everything you thought you knew about the Vikings.
It's amazing what trash can tell us, isn't it?
It really is. We are walking into the muddy, noisy, just smoke-filled streets of a real Viking city to see how they actually lived. Not how they fought, but how they lived.
Which is a huge distinction.
Huge. So I want you to picture this. You're standing in this densely packed street. There are haggling voices shouting in like half a dozen different languages all around you.
And then the smell, we have to talk about the smell.
Oh, the air is incredibly thick. It smells like wood smoke. But underneath that, well, there's the sharp, just acrid stench of tanning pits.
Tanning leather is not a delicate process.
Oh, it is foul. And there's the heavy scent of cooking fish. Plus the unmistakable odor of thousands of unwashed bodies living shoulder to shoulder.
Right, packed in tight.
You can hear the rhythmic, ringing hammering of a metalsmith just a few feet away. And right under your feet, pigs and chickens are just running through the muck.
It is a profound shift in perspective from the last 3 seasons, and honestly, it's a necessary one.
Why is that?
Because, if we only look at the Norse through the lens of their military conquests, which is what everyone does, we are missing the vast majority of their actual human experience.
Right.
The people we think of as Vikings, they spent very little of their lives actually holding an axe on a battlefield.
Like maybe a few weeks out of the year, if that.
Exactly. And a vast amount of their time was spent just trying to make a living, trying to survive the winter, and while building a community.
Which brings up a really interesting point about pop culture. Because if you've seen the Netflix show Vikings, or really any pop culture depiction of the era, they depict this specific city we're talking about today, York, as this massive bloody prize.
Oh, yeah. Always the big target.
Yeah, right. It's portrayed as this strategic stronghold that the Norse are constantly fighting over. It's a war camp, a target for plunder. It's all about, like, who holds the gates.
And, the military struggle over York was very real, yes. It was a highly contested space between different factions. But the deeper, infinitely more fascinating historical truth that those battles only hint at, it's that York wasn't just a war camp.
It wasn't just a fortress.
No, it wasn't just a place you conquered so you could steal its wealth, hoard all the silver, and sail away. It was a permanent Viking home.
A place to actually settle down.
Right. It was a bustling metropolis. It was a place where people lived, worked, raised their children, and died generation after generation.
And our mission for this deep dive is to explore this city, specifically the Viking incarnation of it, which was known as Jorvik.
Jorvik, yes.
We are going to explore it literally from the ground up, because a huge part of this city was dug directly out of the damp English earth. And what we find in that dirt completely overturns the one-dimensional axe-wielding raider image that we've been following all series long.
It forces us to reconcile the popular myth with physical, indisputable reality. You can't argue with what you find in the ground.
You really can't. But before we get our hands dirty in the archaeological mud of everyday life, we kind of need to establish exactly what this city was structurally and historically.
Right, set the stage.
We need to understand how the Norse came to claim it in the first place and why it became such a massive focal point. Because York wasn't just an empty field by a river that the Vikings decided to, pitch a bunch of tents on.
Oh, not at all.
This is a city with incredibly deep pre-existing layers, right?
Incredibly deep. To understand Jorvik, you have to realize that the Vikings were inheriting centuries of urban history and infrastructure. This site didn't start with them. It started as a Roman fortress and city called Eboracum.
Eboracum. And that was founded, what, way back in the 1st century?
Exactly, first century. And this wasn't some backwater outpost on the edge of the empire either. This was a major fortified center of Roman Britain.
I mean, Roman emperors actually stayed there, didn't they?
They did. The infrastructure, the road networks converging on the site, the defensive positioning, all of that was laid down by Roman engineers centuries before a Viking ever saw it.
So it was a seat of serious imperial power.
It really was. Then, after the Romans left Britain in the 5th century, the site evolved. It became a crucial Anglo-Saxon hub known as Eoforwic.
Eoforwic, which sounds a little closer to York.
It does. And under the Anglo-Saxons, it became a royal and religious center for the Kingdom of Northumbria. It was a place of stone churches, of monastic learning, of significant political gravity.
It had the wealth.
It had libraries, scholars, and a lot of wealth. So when the Vikings arrive, they are stepping into a location that already has a massive historical footprint and a built-in economic engine.
And as we covered in our past deep dive on the Great Heathen Army, they took York in 866.
Right.
Now, we aren't going to retell the story of that whole conquest or the whole thing with the death of King Elijah. We spent plenty of time on that battlefield already.
We covered the blood and guts back then.
Exactly. The vital takeaway for today is that once the Norse took it, they didn't just loot it and burn it to the ground. They made it their own. They settled. And they adapted the name Eoforwic to Jorvik in their own Norse tongue.
Jorvik. And it officially becomes the capital of a Viking kingdom in the north of England, the Kingdom of York, or the Kingdom of Jorvik.
So it's an actual functioning state now.
Exactly. And what's crucial to grasp here is how Jorvik fit into the broader geopolitical landscape of the Viking world.
Okay.
Because it wasn't an isolated pocket of Norse control cut off from the rest of their territories, just stranded in England. It was actually the eastern anchor of a massive dynamic network that spanned the entire Irish Sea.
Connected heavily to Dublin, right?
Very heavily.
But, I mean, how does that actually work in practice? We were talking about the 9th and 10th centuries here. You have Dublin on the east coast of Ireland and York in the northeast of England.
Right.
There is a whole sea and a massive landmass between them. How do you manage a unified sphere of power across that kind of geography back then?
Well, that is the logistical marvel of it. The connection was managed by the Uí-Imer dynasty, the descendants of Ivar. At various times, the same family ruled both Dublin and York.
Oh, so it's literally a family business stretching across the water.
Exactly. You had kings and warbands physically traveling back and forth to claim one throne or the other or to support their relatives. And to do this, they utilized a very specific multimodal transit route.
Multimodal, so boats and walking.
Right. They would sail out of Dublin, cross the Irish Sea, and land on the northwest coast of England, places like the Wirral Peninsula or modern-day Lancashire. But from there, it wasn't just a matter of marching blindly overland.
They must use the river systems. I mean, they're Vikings.
Precisely. The Norse were fundamentally a riverine culture. They would navigate their shallow draft ships as far inland as possible, up rivers like the Ribble.
Okay, so they sail inland as far as the water goes.
And then they use established overland portages, ancient Roman roads or mountain passes through the Pennines to cross the spine of England.
They're just lugging their gear across the mountains.
Hauling it right across. And once they were over the mountains, they would drop their ships back into the river systems flowing east, like the Ouse, which carried them directly down into York.
That is wild.
This corridor was a vital artery. It wasn't just for communication or troop movement, but most importantly, commerce.
Which brings up the economic side of this Dublin-York axis. In an earlier deep dive, we talked about the origins of the Viking slave trade.
We did, yeah.
We know that Dublin was one of the largest slave markets in Western Europe, so York must have been heavily plugged into that dark, brutal economy.
It absolutely was. Jorvik was a primary transit hub for captives taken from the British Isles being moved east, or captives from the continent being moved west to Dublin.
Wow. So the trade is flowing both ways through the city.
Yes. But, setting the grim origins of that specific trade aside for a moment, the overarching point is that this cross-sea connection proves how plugged in Jorvik was.
It wasn't isolated.
Not at all. It was a nerve center. It was cosmopolitan. It was constantly receiving influences of wealth, people, and goods from across the entire Viking sphere.
Okay, hold on. Let me push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
Because you're setting up this premise that Jorvik was a bustling, prosperous, functioning commercial city where people were just trying to go about their daily lives, right? But the most famous Viking king to rule your town, the very last one, in fact, was a guy named Eric Bloodaxe.
Ah, yes. Eric
Now,
Bloodaxe.
we've met a lot of Viking leaders in this series,
Yeah.
but Bloodaxe does not sound like a guy who is fostering a peaceful, thriving community of woodworkers and
No,
merchants.
it doesn't.
Was this city actually peaceful, or was it a brutal military dictatorship? Because those two realities don't really match.
It's a completely fair challenge, and honestly, it highlights the beautiful, messy contradiction of history. You really have to separate the political superstructure, the guys at the very top with the swords, from the demographic reality of the ordinary people on the street.
So high politics versus daily life.
Exactly. Eric Bloodaxe, or Eric Bloodaxe, was indeed a fearsome figure. He was a Norwegian king, notoriously ruthless, who was actually driven out of Norway by his own family.
Wow. Too ruthless for his own Viking family.
Pretty much. He came west as a warlord and managed to seize the rule of Jorvik twice. His career was exceptionally violent, and his reign in York was fraught with political instability, assassinations, and constant warfare against the English kings to the south.
Right, because the descendants of Alfred the Great were constantly trying to squeeze the Norse out of northern England during this time.
Exactly. They wanted a unified England. So at the top level, yes, it was incredibly turbulent. Eric Bloodaxe was ultimately driven out and killed in an ambush around 954. And with his death, the independent Viking political state in York effectively ceases to exist.
The English crown steps in and claims ultimate authority.
They do.
But this is where the story gets fascinating, because the kingdom dies, but the city doesn't.
Exactly. This is the core of what we might call the absorption theme. The political borders shifted, the English kings took the throne, but the Norse inhabitants, they didn't just pack up their longships and vanish back to Scandinavia.
Right, the people making the shoes, weaving the cloth, and baking the bread, they didn't care that the guy with the bloody axe wasn't sitting in the high hall anymore.
They didn't.
They still had to make a living. They had businesses. They had homes.
Precisely. They stayed. And over the following decades, they simply integrated. The Norse inhabitants intermarried with the Anglo-Saxons. They adopted Christianity more fully. The languages began to blend.
Just a slow merge.
Yeah. The commercial life of the city, the trade networks they had established carried on and actually fueled the later medieval prosperity of York. The cultures absorbed one another. It was a crucible of blending. The warlords fought their wars and lost their crowns, but the ordinary city endured and thrived.
Okay, so this brings up the most mind-bending question of this whole deep dive.
Let's hear it.
If the Viking kingdom officially fell in 954, over 1,000 years ago, and if the ordinary people just blended into the background of medieval England, how on earth do we know what they were doing? Like, how do we know what an ordinary Viking citizen ate for breakfast? Or what they wore on their feet? Or what kind of games they played? It's not like they were leaving behind detailed memoirs about their footwear.
They certainly were not. The Norse were largely an oral culture. And the texts we do have, the sagas, which were written centuries later, they care almost exclusively about the grand drama.
The flashy stuff.
Right. They care about heroes, treacherous kings, blood feuds, mythological beasts. They do not care about cobblers or wood-turners or how someone managed a parasite infection.
Definitely not.
So to find the truth of everyday life, we had to abandon the libraries and look to the ground.
And that takes us to modern-day York, to the late 1970s and early 1980s, and to what has to be one of the greatest archaeological achievements of the 20th century, the Coppergate excavation.
The Coppergate dig fundamentally changed our understanding of the Viking Age. It really did. It was a massive, multi-year excavation that took place ahead of a modern shopping center redevelopment project right in the historical heart of York.
So they're just getting ready to build a mall.
Exactly. They were digging down to lay modern concrete foundations, and in the process, they hit the jackpot.
But before we even talk about the physical mechanics of what they found in the dirt, we have to talk about the name Coppergate itself.
Oh, the name is brilliant.
Because there is this linguistic Easter egg hiding right there in the open, proving your point about how the Norse just absorbed into the city.
Yes, the name of the modern street where the dig took place. If you hear the word Coppergate, especially in an ancient English city, you naturally assume it has something to do with a physical gate made of copper.
Right, like maybe a fancy entrance to a guild hall or something.
Exactly. But it has absolutely nothing to do with metal or gates. The name is actually a corruption of Old Norse. It's a combination of two words. Copper, which means a cup or a small wooden vessel, and gata, which means street.
The street of the cup makers.
Exactly. It's fossilized language. The modern street names of York still hold the thousand-year-old fingerprints of Viking craftsmen.
That is so cool.
When the English took over, they didn't rename everything. The locals just kept calling it the Street of the Cupmakers, and over a millennium, Coppergata smoothed out into English as Coppergate. In fact, any street in York today ending in Copic, like Micklegate or Walmgate, is echoing that Norse word for street, not a physical wall gate.
That is amazing. The ghosts of Viking woodturners are just hanging out on modern street signs, guiding tourists to the local pub.
Very true.
But okay, let's get into the actual dirt, because archaeologists dig holes all over the world all the time.
That is their job.
Right. They find stone foundations, they find rusted arrowheads, they find broken pottery shards. What makes the dirt at Coppergate so astronomically special? Like, why did this specific hole in the ground change history?
To understand why Coppergate is an absolute miracle, we have to take a quick detour into the biology of decay.
Okay, biology lesson, I'm ready.
In a standard archaeological dig, let's say a field in France or a dry hillside in Greece, the soil is relatively aerated. It has gaps. That means oxygen can freely penetrate the soil.
Right.
And wherever there is oxygen and moisture, you have aerobic bacteria and fungi.
The tiny organisms whose entire job is to eat dead things.
Precisely. They are the great recyclers of the natural world, and what they love to eat is organic material. Cellulose, lignin, proteins, fats.
All the soft stuff.
Yeah. So over the course of a few decades, let alone 1,000 years, anything made of wood, leather, woven cloth, bone, or plant matter, it completely rots away to nothing. The bacteria consume it entirely.
Wow.
All you are left with is the hard stuff. Stone, fired pottery, gold, rusted chunks of iron, the durable, inorganic scraps.
So usually archaeologists are trying to reconstruct a vanished world using only the most indestructible and, frankly, the least informative pieces of it.
It's a very incomplete puzzle.
It's like trying to figure out how a family lived, what their personalities were, what they cared about, by only looking at the brick chimney of their ruined house and maybe a few ceramic plates.
That's a great way to put it.
You're completely missing the clothes in their closet, the food in their pantry, the wooden toys their kids played with, the trash in their bins. You are missing the whole picture.
But Coppergate wasn't like that.
No. Coppergate is like finding the closet, the pantry, and the trash cans perfectly intact.
No. The reason for that comes down to a geographical fluke. York is situated in a basin where two rivers, the Ouse and the Foss, meet. The soil there contains a lot of clay. And over the centuries, particularly after the Norman conquest, when they built a dam on the River Foss to create a moat for their new castle, the water table in York rose significantly.
So the ground where the Vikings had lived suddenly flooded from underneath.
Exactly. The Viking layers of the city were submerged in groundwater. The soil became completely waterlogged. It was dense, wet, and critically oxygen poor. It became an anaerobic environment.
Wait, so if the bacteria are starved of oxygen, does that mean the biological recycling process just stops? Did the wood they pulled out of the ground actually still look like fresh wood?
To an astonishing degree, yes. Without oxygen acting as an electron acceptor, the aerobic bacteria that normally break down organic matter simply cannot function. They drown, essentially.
That's incredible.
Now, there are anaerobic bacteria, but they work incredibly slowly. So the rapid rot we associate with the compost heap just halted. The wet, dense clay earth acted as a 1,000-year time capsule. When archaeologists carefully peeled back the layers in the 1970s, the wood was still wood. The leather was still flexible.
That is staggering. 1,000 years of history just hit the pause button because the dirt was too wet for bacteria to breathe.
It preserved the perishable, everyday substance of Viking life. Standard digs find the post holes where a wooden building used to stand.
Like just dark circles in the dirt.
Right. But at Coppergate, they found the actual timber walls, they found the wooden floors, they found fence posts with the axe marks still clearly visible.
That gives me chills.
They found seeds, they found spun wool, they found intact leather shoes.
And opening up that 1,000-year-old waterlogged closet completely overturns the core stereotype of the Viking Age. Because when you look at the thousands of objects preserved in that wet earth, you don't see an army camp. You don't see a transient population of raiders polishing their swords. You see an incredibly complex city of makers.
Jorvik was, above all else, a buzzing, highly specialized industrial center of crafts and manufacturing. The excavations revealed exactly how the city was laid out. You had these narrow, densely packed properties running back from the main street.
Sort of like a modern high street.
Very much so. And each plot contained a timber building that served as a combined home, workshop, and storefront.
And the construction of these homes is fascinating
Yeah.
because they weren't building grand stone halls. You mentioned wattle earlier.
Yes.
Let's define that because it's a huge part of how they built the city.
Wattle is a brilliant, highly efficient building technique. You drive sturdy wooden posts into the ground, usually oak. Then you take flexible younger branches, often hazel or willow, and you weave them horizontally in and out of the upright posts.
Almost like weaving a giant rigid basket.
Exactly like that.
And then you cover it in daub to weatherproof it.
Right. Daub is a mixture of mud, clay, animal dung, and straw. You plaster that thick mixture over the woven wattle, and when it dries, it forms a hard, windproof, insulating wall.
It's cheap, the materials are locally abundant, and it goes up quickly.
And because of the waterlogged soil, the archaeologists at Coppergate literally found panels of this Viking wattle still woven together.
So picture these long wattle and daub houses packed tightly together along the street. And inside, it is a genuine industrial zone. You've got the wood turners, the guys giving Coppergate its name.
The copper makers.
Right? They are using pole lathes, which is like a foot-operated spinning machine, to carve blocks of wood into perfect symmetrical bowls and cups.
And they were fast at it, too.
You've got leather workers churning out sheaths for knives, belts, straps, and shoes. And we know exactly how busy they were because the dirt was packed with massive quantities of leather offcuts.
The literal waste from a booming workshop. When you make a shoe, you cut the pattern out of a hide and throw the scraps on the floor. For 1,000 years, those scraps just sat there in the mud, proving the sheer volume of production.
It's amazing.
You had metalsmiths working iron over roaring hearths, creating tools, nails, and locks. You had finer craftsmen working copper, silver, and gold into intricate rings and brooches. You had textile workers spinning thread with drop spindles and weaving cloth on large, upright, vertical looms.
But of all the industries they uncovered, there is one that absolutely fascinates me. And it is the comb makers.
Ah, yes, the antler and bone workers.
Because I want to draw a massive contrast here. Think back to our past deep dives. Think about the terrifying raiders descending on the unarmed monks at Lindisfarne, or the massive shield-biting warriors in the Great Heathen Army.
Very different imagery.
Pop culture gives us this indelible image of the Viking as a blood-soaked, filthy, wild-haired barbarian screaming in the mud. But here in Jorvik, one of the most prominent high-volume industries in the entire city was dedicated entirely to making beautifully carved, meticulous, fine-toothed grooming combs.
It is a striking juxtaposition. It's the exact same people, the exact same culture, but a totally different face.
Hold on. I want to really emphasize how crazy this is. The hand that swung the axe at the English monk is now sitting at a workbench, meticulously carving a grooming comb.
Ugh.
Because they cared deeply about their hair.
I really did.
The dirty barbarian myth just completely falls apart when you see the sheer volume of grooming products they were manufacturing and buying.
It forces us to recognize their humanity and, frankly, their vanity. The Norse cared immensely about their appearance. They bathed regularly, certainly more often than their Anglo-Saxon neighbors.
Really?
Oh, yeah. The Anglo-Saxons actually complained in contemporary texts that the Vikings were seducing their women because they combed their hair and changed their clothes.
They were the well-groomed bad boys of the 10th century.
Exactly.
But what goes into making one of these combs? Because they're just carving them out of a piece of pine wood.
No, they were primarily using antler, specifically red deer and reindeer antler. Antler is an incredible material. It's tough, it has a slight flexibility so the fine teeth don't snap easily, and it handles moisture well, which is crucial for a comb.
Right, because you're using it on wet hair.
Exactly. But you can't just go out and hunt enough deer to support an industrial-scale comb factory in a city of thousands.
Right, that's not sustainable. You'd run out of deer in a week.
So they relied on shed antlers. Every year, male deer naturally shed their antlers. This implies an entire unseen rural supply chain.
Oh, wow.
You had people out in the forests and hills across the region, gathering fallen antlers and bringing them into the city to sell to the comb makers. The craftsmen would then saw the antler into plates, rivet them together with iron pins, and use incredibly fine saws to cut the teeth.
That sounds like highly skilled work.
It was highly skilled, specialized labor. They were creating beautiful, useful, everyday things, and building a massive economy around it.
And what an economy it was.
Oh.
Because Jorvik wasn't just producing goods for the locals to trade amongst themselves. This wasn't just a quaint little farmer's market where the comb maker traded with the cup maker.
This is much bigger than that.
When you look at the trade goods pulled out of the dirt at Coppergate, it reveals a global web that is frankly mind-blowing.
It proves that Jorvik was a major international commercial hub, plugged into a network that spanned much of the known world. The materials they found had traveled enormous distances.
Okay, let's synthesize this geography, because it's insane to think about all these things converging in a damp wattle and daub house in the north of England.
Let's do it.
The archaeologists found amber, clearly imported from the Baltic region, ready to be worked into beads. They found specialized whetstones for sharpening tools and weapons, which geologists trace back to specific rock formations in Scandinavia. They found soapstone vessels, which had to be brought over from Norway because that kind of stone doesn't exist in England.
Those represent the internal, regional Norse trade routes, the local stuff, basically. But as you dig deeper, the web expands dramatically.
Right, because they also found a cowrie shell and a piece of actual silk. And a silver dirham coin minted by the Islamic caliphates.
Let's break down the mechanics of how those get to York. A cowrie shell can only originate in the warm waters of the Red Sea or the Indian Ocean.
Thousands of miles away.
Silk in this era comes from the Byzantine Empire or all the way from China. The silver dirham is from Central Asia or the Middle East.
I am genuinely struggling to picture the logistics of this. How does a shell from the Red Sea end up in the pocket of a guy making cups in northern England in the year 920? Did one Norse merchant walk all the way to Egypt?
No, it wasn't a single merchant making the whole trip. It was a chain of massive interconnected trade arteries dominated by the rest, the Eastern Vikings.
The rest.
We discussed earlier how the Norse were a riverine culture. They utilized the massive river systems of Eastern Europe, the Volga and the Dnieper rivers.
The river roads.
Exactly. They would sail their ships from the Baltic Sea down these massive rivers, deep into the heart of the continent. And when they hit rapids they couldn't sail through, or when they needed to cross from one river system to another, they engaged in portaging.
Like we talked about earlier over the Pennines.
Just on a much grander scale, they would literally haul their long ships out of the water, put them on wooden rollers, and drag them overland using raw human and animal power until they reached navigable water again.
That sounds absolutely grueling. Just dragging a massive oak ship through the mud.
It was incredibly dangerous and physically punishing, but it allowed them to connect the frozen Baltic directly to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. They met Islamic merchants in markets like Bulgar on the Volga, trading furs, amber, and slaves for massive quantities of Islamic silver, dirhams, silk, and spices. From there, those goods moved hand to hand up the rivers, across the Baltic, across the North Sea, and up the River Ouse, right into Jorvik.
You really have to pause and visualize that. You have a merchant standing in a smoky timber house in Viking York, holding a silver coin minted in Central Asia, a shell from the Indian Ocean, and silk from China. It is a three-continent web.
It's early globalization.
It really is. And it serves as a powerful reminder about the core technology of this era, the longship. Because we always think of the longship as this terrifying weapon of war, this dragon-headed thing that appears on the horizon to bring doom to coastal monasteries.
The longship was a brilliant troop transport, yes, but its genius was its versatility. Its shallow draft allowed it to navigate deep inland via those eastern rivers or English estuaries, but its clinker-built hull was sturdy enough to cross the open, violent North Atlantic Ocean.
So it's basically the perfect multi-tool.
It was the ultimate cargo vessel. It was the engine of this sophisticated intercontinental economy. The Viking who plundered could also profit honestly through trade, often in the same voyage. The technology served both the raider and the merchant equally.
It's incredible to think about a Norse merchant handling Chinese silk and Islamic silver. It feels very grand and worldly. But as much as the Coppergate dig reveals this vast, impressive macroeconomy, I think the real emotional punch of this site is the micro stuff.
The everyday things?
Yes, because that wet anaerobic earth didn't just preserve the luxury goods, it preserved the highly intimate, completely unglamorous realities of existing in a crowded city. And Jorvik was packed. We were talking about a population of 10 to 15,000 people.
That is a staggering population density for Northern Europe at that time. Most people lived in tiny, scattered rural farming hamlets. To put 15,000 people into a city footprint that small.
Let's use an analogy here. Imagine taking the entire population of a modern rural county, everyone from all the little towns and farms, and packing them into an area roughly the size of a few large shopping mall parking lots.
Packed in like sardines.
And here's the kicker. There is zero modern plumbing, no trash collection, no sewers, just 15,000 people, their animals, and their industries all crammed together.
The preservation of the daily debris gives us a visceral, almost uncomfortable window into what it physically felt like to survive in that density.
Let's look at the daily survival aspects, starting with the diet. Because those anaerobic bacteria didn't just ignore the wood, they ignored the food waste, too. The archaeologists found the seeds, the fruit pits, the butchered animal bones. What were they actually eating in this muddy metropolis?
It was a surprisingly varied and calorie-dense diet, which you need in that climate. The bones tell us they were eating significant amounts of beef, mutton, and pork.
Okay, lots of meat.
They kept chickens for both meat and eggs. Unsurprisingly, given their nautical skills and location, they consumed huge quantities of fish, both freshwater species from the rivers, like pike, and marine fish from the sea, like herring and cod.
And they'd preserve that, right?
Yes, it could be salted or dried for preservation to last the winter.
They weren't just eating meat, though.
No. They found evidence of whole wheat and rye, which they ground into flour for dense breads or boiled into thick porridge. And the seeds preserved in the mud tell us they had access to a surprising variety of fruits and vegetables. Plums, sloes, apples, cherries, blackberries, and various herbs used for flavoring.
Honestly, a beef and barley stew with some fresh bread and an apple doesn't sound like a bad menu.
No, it's pretty good.
But alongside the food waste, the mud gave up these deeply humanizing artifacts that just make you ache with how relatable they are. They found gaming pieces and dice carved from bone.
Yes, the nefataful pieces.
Which means these people got bored. They relaxed, they gambled, they sat around a fire on a rainy English evening and played board games with their friends, just like we do.
They also found evidence of how they survived the brutal damp and cold. They uncovered a perfectly preserved knitted sock.
Oh, love this sock.
Except it wasn't knitted in the modern sense. It was made using an ancient technique called knoll binding.
Wait, how is knoll binding different from the knitting I'd see, like my grandmother doing?
Modern knitting uses 2 long needles and continuous spool of yarn. If you snag a knitted sweater on a nail, the whole thing can unravel in a long string.
Right, you pull the thread and it just vanishes.
Knoll binding is much older and much tougher. It uses a single, flat needle, often made of bone or wood, and short lengths of woolen yarn. You create loops and physically pull the entire length of the yarn through the loop, creating a series of complex knots.
So it's more like a dense, interlocking mesh.
Exactly. Because each loop is knotted, if you tear a hole in a knoll-binding sock, it will not unravel. The hole just stays the exact size it is. It creates an incredibly thick, durable, and almost waterproof fabric, which is exactly what you need when you are walking around a waterlogged, freezing city.
Speaking of walking around, let's talk about the shoes. The transition from keeping your feet warm to managing the literal mud of Jorvik brings us to one of the most poignant finds of the dig.
The leather shoes.
They found leather shoes, but not just stiff, unworn examples. These shoes had been worn so extensively for so long that the leather was stretched and molded into the exact unique shape of a long-dead person's foot.
It's remarkable.
You can see where their toes rubbed, you can see the bulge of a bunion.
And critically, you can see the repairs. These shoes were covered in patches, extra layers of leather stitched over the soles where they had worn through.
Which tells a profound story of economic reality. These weren't the decorative boots of a wealthy jarl or a king. These were the shoes of an ordinary person, maybe a wattle weaver or a fishmonger, who simply couldn't afford to buy a new pair when the old ones got a hole in them.
Right, they had to make do.
They had to sit down, punch holes in scraps of leather, and meticulously stitch patches onto the sole just to keep the freezing mud out of their toes for one more winter. It's a direct physical trace of an individual's daily struggle to get by.
It is deeply moving. You look at that patched shoe in a display case, and the grand sweeping narrative of Viking conquest just vanishes. You feel an immediate empathetic connection to the human being who wore it.
Okay, we're getting very profound and emotional about patched shoes.
We are.
But if we were going to talk about intimate, unglamorous, highly personal, physical traces left behind by the inhabitants of Jorvik, if we are talking about what the anaerobic mud preserved, We have to talk about the most famous find of the entire excavation.
I knew we were going to end up here. I just knew it.
We absolutely have to. It is my favorite thing, and I will not apologize for it. Because among the Byzantine silk, the Baltic amber, the silver dirhams, and the beautifully carved combs, the archaeologists found a perfectly preserved, massive piece of fossilized Viking human waste.
Yes. The technical scientific term is a coprolite, but it is fundamentally a 1,000-year-old Viking stool.
And it is huge. It's like 8 inches long. It's famously known as the Lloyd's Bank coprolite because they found it right where the modern bank was going to be built.
That's right.
It is literally a fossilized turd that has its own Wikipedia page, has been insured for tens of thousands of dollars, and is displayed on a velvet cushion in a museum like a crown jewel.
It really is on a cushion.
I just gleefully love how humbling this is. For all the sagas of glorious blood-soaked battles and all the soaring poetry of the Norse gods, one of our greatest historical treasures is poop.
It is entirely valid to find humor in it. The juxtaposition is inherently funny. But the reason it is displayed in a museum, the reason scientists insured it and study it, goes far beyond the novelty factor. We have to look at the mechanics of how this even exists.
Right. How does human waste turn into a rock?
It is a process of mineralization. In that specific, wet, mineral-rich environment, over centuries, the organic material is slowly replaced by minerals, specifically calcium phosphate from the surrounding soil.
So it's like a microscopic game of musical chairs. Over 1,000 years, a mineral molecule sneaks in and takes the seat of an organic cell one by one until the whole structure is essentially turned to stone but keeps its exact original shape.
That is a perfect analogy. And because it mineralized so perfectly, it trapped the microscopic contents of that person's digestive tract inside it. When researchers carefully analyzed cross-sections of the coprolite under a microscope, it didn't just confirm a diet of meat and bran grains, it revealed a medical nightmare.
Oh, wow. Okay, tone shift.
Yes. The analysis revealed that the piece of waste contained tens of thousands of microscopic parasite eggs. Specifically, the eggs of the whipworm and the mawworm.
Mawworm. Wait, those are the really big ones, right? Like earthworm size.
Yes. They can grow up to a foot long inside the human intestine.
Oh my God.
And the density of the eggs in this single sample tells us that the person who produced it was absolutely riddled with them. They had a massive, chronic, debilitating infestation of intestinal parasites. Their stomach and intestines were full of worms.
That sounds agonizing. Just awful. But what does one infected person actually tell us about the bigger picture of Jorvik? Was this just one really unlucky guy?
No, it proves, in the most undeniable, visceral way possible, the unsanitary reality of this entire environment. Let's go back to your analogy of packing a whole county into a shopping mall parking lot with no plumbing. When you have 15,000 people living packed together in narrow timber houses, when you have pigs and chickens roaming the muddy streets and yards, when you are digging pits for human and animal waste just a few feet away from where you are drawing your water or baking your bread, the hygienic barrier collapses completely.
Because these parasites are transmitted via the fecal-oral route.
Exactly. The eggs are passed in human waste, they contaminate the soil, they get onto people's hands, onto their boots, onto the food, and they are ingested again. The life cycle thrives in that exact environment. So, behind the bustling economy, behind the glorious global trade network bringing in silk and silver, the everyday reality for the average person was deeply, chronically uncomfortable.
It was incredibly dense. It was unsanitary. The air was choking with smoke from the metalsmiths and the hearths. The tanning pits smelled horrific, and almost everyone likely suffered from chronic, painful conditions like parasite infestations.
This single piece of fossilized waste gives us a more honest, unfiltered connection to an ordinary human being's daily suffering and physical reality than any heroic saga ever could. The sagas give us the towering gods and the invincible kings. The coprolite gives us a real, vulnerable human being enduring the severe discomfort of a crowded, muddy northern town just trying to survive.
You know, it's amazing how far we've traveled in this deep dive. We start with Eric Bloodaxe, grand political shifts across the Irish Sea, and massive trade empires. And we end up looking at patch shoes and the life cycle of intestinal worms.
It's quite a journey.
It really reframes everything we thought we knew.
That is the ultimate power of archaeology. It strips away the myth and forces you to confront the reality of the dirt.
Okay, so if we take a step back and look at the whole picture of Jorvik, I think there are 3 massive takeaways that we can synthesize for you, the listener, from all this mud and history.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first takeaway is that Jorvik fundamentally shatters the raider myth. Yes, the Norse were terrifying warriors on the battlefield, But they were also brilliant town builders, astute businessmen, and meticulous craftsmen. They were makers, not just takers.
The second takeaway is that they were the ultimate connectors of the medieval world. We have to stop seeing the Viking Age as just Scandinavia projecting violence outward in isolated raids. It was an integrated network.
Right.
Through the ingenuity of the longship and the grueling labor of the river portages, they tied 3 disparate continents, from the Baltic to the Red Sea to Central Asia, together in the muddy streets of northern England.
And the third takeaway is the sheer value of the dirt itself. Archaeology gives us the ordinary people this sagas forgot to write about. It gives us the wood-turner at his lathe, the person gambling with bone dice, the citizen shivering in an old-binding sock, and the person repairing their leather shoe for the 5th time.
And if I can offer a final thought on that, when you read the history books or watch the dramatic shows, you naturally focus on the grand drama of the kings, the battles, and the sieges. But Jorvik suggests a radical alternative.
What's that?
That the grand drama was actually just a noisy sideshow. The deeper truth of the Viking Age, the vast economic and social foundation that everything else rested on, was actually those ordinary, unnamed people making wooden cups, dealing with parasites, and trading amber in the muddy background. They are the true substance of the era. The kings come and go, but the city survives.
That is a perfect, profound way to look at it. The noisy sideshow versus the muddy reality. And speaking of changing the scenery, we are not done exploring the wider Viking world.
Not even close.
Because next time, we are jumping from this bustling, damp wattle and daub town in England to the absolute opposite edge of the Viking sphere of influence.
A completely different environment and a completely different kind of power.
We are going to travel east. We'll follow those great river roads of Russia we talked about today, moving through the vast freezing forests, all the way south to the dazzling golden city of Constantinople.
To meet the legendary Varangian Guard of the Byzantine Emperor.
Yes, we're going to explore how the Vikings operated not as invaders, but as the elite, axe-wielding bodyguards of the most powerful empire in the Mediterranean. And we'll even find the exact spot where a bored Viking mercenary carved his name into the marble of the Hagia Sophia. So you definitely won't want to miss that. I invite you to keep following along. Thank you so much for exploring the muddy, messy, incredible streets of Jorvik with us today. Until next time, Skelfac.